Morning, everyone. My name is Brian. We are today at the LKK Auto Consultants Training Facility. I'm a trainer with the Singapore Centre of Institute of Automotive Engineers and Assessors. So today, I'm going to demonstrate a basic workshop setup where they are working on high voltage vehicles. We have a Toyota Prius C, which is a hybrid vehicle. I'm going to show the personal protection equipment that the technicians or mechanics should have when they're working on high voltage vehicles. I will also be showing the basic safety insulated tools that technicians and mechanics should be using when they are working on high voltage vehicles. Right now, first of all, we have a Toyota Prius C here, and one of the identification for high voltage vehicles would be the badges. Badges like the hybrid here that you can see. Now these badges can be found on the front fenders or at the rear tailgate. This is one of the identification that you can use to determine whether the vehicle is a high voltage vehicle or a normal internal combustion engine vehicle. Now, other identification methods you can see would be the orange color cable, and the orange colored label that you can see here. The other methods, okay, would also be when you start the vehicle on the instrument cluster, you will see the word ready or hybrid. So this will tell you that the vehicle is a high voltage vehicle. Now, you can see we have barricaded this Toyota Prius C. Now, the purpose of this barricade is to warn people that this area is a high voltage area. So for vehicles that you bring into the workshop, the premises, the first thing that you should be doing is you should be setting up a barrier. Now, the recommendation space between the car and the barrier will be 1 meter on all four sides. Warning signs indicating high voltage danger should be placed outside of the barrier. This is an additional warning for people that will notice to keep away. We need to warn the people to keep away. Now, on top of this, all these signs, all right, to warn people, adequate warning signs to be placed all around the vehicle. Now, if you notice here, there's a technician in charge. Now, only technicians or mechanics that have gone through some formal training in handling high voltage vehicle are allowed to work on high voltage vehicle. So you could write the name of the technician in charge of this vehicle here so that anyone seeing this will know to contact this person, and only this person can touch on this high voltage vehicle. I will go on to the engine bay and show on where is the high voltage battery for this Toyota Prius, and also how to isolate the high voltage system later. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show some of the basic safety requirements for technicians and panel beaters and mechanics when they are working on high voltage vehicle. One of the most basic one would be the rubber gloves. Now, these are rubber gloves, and these rubber gloves has to be a 1000 voltage capacity, the class 0. Now, usually these rubber gloves or equipment will be lying around in the workshop. Every time that you want to use the rubber glove, you need to ensure that the rubber gloves have no tear or have no cut. Because if there's a tear or it's a cut, high voltage may pass through and go past your body and down to earth, and you could possibly be electrocuted. Now, one of the ways that we can test whether there's any leakage in this high voltage glove is by putting air inside and then actually hearing to see if there's any air coming out. Right? I'm going to do a simple demonstration. So you can put it to your ears Okay, to see if there's any leak, you can press, right? So to make sure that there's no leakage of air. Now, if there's no leakage of air, it would typically means that there's no hole in this rubber glove, and you can actually use it to work on high voltage components. Now, sometimes we will see a hole that is caused by a small needle, which may not be naked to the visible eye, and the air may not leak as fast if it's a bigger hole. Now, you are recommended to put it near your ears so that you can hear as well of any hissing sound. Alright? Okay. Now, we all know that water is the best friend of electricity. Now, so what you can do as an added precaution, we will recommend you use your cloth glove, okay, just to put in your hands so that when you're working on high voltage components, your sweat will not drip out and come into contact if there's any electrical leakage. You could be using, right, in this way, so that down here, if there's any sweat, it will be absorbed by this cloth glove. Now, these are some of the other warning signs and labels, okay, that you can get to place around your high voltage vehicles. The other key equipment would be the multimeter. Now, the multimeter needs to be at least 1000 volt. Needs to be at least 1000 volt. Now, if you can see here, okay, so it says 1000 volt. Now, why do you need 1000 volt? On average, typically, our high voltage vehicles, which is the hybrids and the full electrics, they have an average of around 300 to 400 plus voltage DC current. So that's why you need a bigger voltage multimeter, because if you're going to get something which is lower, it may not be able to tell you any useful information, right? Now, same thing, before you even test on the high voltage equipments to check if there's any electrical leakage, what you need to do is to make sure that the multimeter is actually working, because you do not want a faulty multimeter which gives you wrong information, right? So one of the ways that you could test is, of course, we check through the current. Now this is, we can turn it to ohms, all right? Ohms is the measurement of current, and we can put two of the probes together, and you should get about 0. Okay, now this tells you that the probes are working. Now, in the multimeter itself, there is different measurements. You can measure AC, which is alternating current, and DC, which is direct current. Now, current from the high voltage battery into the high voltage components are all direct current, whereas the electrical motor that powers the hybrid and powers the electric vehicles work on alternating current, which is AC. So you need to make sure that you turn into the correct voltages or the correct unit measurements when you are measuring the different components. Always remember that battery stores direct current, and you're doing any measurements on the battery in terms of the voltages, you should be turning your dial to the direct current. And if you're doing on electrical motors or even the inverters, you should be turning it into AC, alternating current. More often than not, the unit of measurements will be shown on the screen, right? So you can see here, there's a volt DC. Okay, so this is for direct current, and which is usually used on measurements on batteries. Batteries stores current that are in, or rather battery stores direct current. Here you can see AC volt. All right, so this is the unit of measurement you should use when you are measuring the high voltage components like the inverter, electrical motor, and even the compressor. All right, now the other way which we would recommend or advise how you should test the voltmeter, multimeter, whether is it working, is to test on a fixed voltage component. Now, we all know in a vehicle, regardless of whether is it an ICE vehicle or a high voltage vehicle, they would have a 12 volt auxiliary battery. Now, we all know that battery is 12 volts. So that is considered as a fixed voltage component. So what we can do, we can test using the multimeter to make sure that to check on the volts of the battery. So effectively, we are also checking the multimeter on this working condition, because this is very important. If you're gonna touch on a high voltage component before you even touch it, you need to ensure that there's no electrical leakage and the voltage is zero or thereabouts. And this is something which is going to tell you that it is safe to touch on the high voltage vehicle, right? Now I'm going to show a demonstration, okay, to test whether this multimeter is in working condition. You follow me to the auxiliary battery of this Toyota Prius C. So I'm going to remove the chain. Now the 12 volt auxiliary battery for this vehicle, okay, it's at the back seat. So I'll turn it to volt DC, right? Because we are measuring the battery. The battery's current is DC, right? So what we can do is we can use our probe and put on the battery's positive and negative terminal, and we're going to see what is the volt. So now if you can see, the voltage is 12.1 volt DC. So this tells me that the battery, 12 volt battery of this vehicle is in good condition, and it also tells me that this multimeter is working. All right. So with this multimeter working, you can use to actually test on high voltage components to make sure that it's zero voltage, and then it's safe for you to work on the vehicle. So the other components that I'm gonna show you would be the insulating tools. Insulating tools when we are working on high voltage vehicle. Now, this is a set, and it contains all the different sizes of bolt and your Phillips screw and a screwdriver. So again, because we are working on high voltage vehicle, all this insulation needs to be 1000 volt and above. Okay, now all these equipments or tools is required to be used when you are working on or when you are removing the high voltage components. Okay, now if once the high voltage system has been isolated and you have tested that there's voltage zero, in other words, there's no current leakage, then you can use these tools to remove the high voltage battery or remove the inverter and the electrical motor. Now, once all is been removed, you can use your other normal tools that you have been using to work on the other body parts of the vehicle, right? Now, always remember when you're touching high voltage components or removing high voltage components, even it is tested zero, you should be wearing your rubber glove, all right? Which we will do a short demonstration later on, because I will be removing the service plug of this Toyota Prius C, which effectively will be isolating the high voltage system of this Toyota Prius C, making it safe for me to work on it.